Let's listen in now to Israel's government as they give their daily briefing.
One of the October 7th war. First, a brief update, and then we will take your questions. We start with an update on the latest figures. Since the start of the October 7th massacre, Hamas has fired more than 11,500 rockets at Israel. More than 2,000 of those have misfired, the large majority failing and landing inside Gaza, causing untold damage within the Gaza Strip. Just yesterday, Hamas launched a massive missile attack on the greater Tel Aviv area, causing damage. Shrapnel from interceptions hit several places in Tel Aviv, including a school, a main street and the beach. The total number of people who have been injured and evacuated to hospital since the start of the massacre is 10,039, including 9,460 physical injuries. The IDF has notified families of the deaths of 410 fallen soldiers, including those who have fallen in on-the-ground targeted fighting. IDF fatalities have risen by 4 since yesterday's update, with the confirmed deaths of Lieutenant Colonel Yochai Gur Hirschberg, Major General Yonatan Malka, Major Eli Eliyahu Cohen, and Sergeant Major Reserves Matan Damari. The number of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza has been revised upward to 138 after an individual previously missing was confirmed to be a hostage of Hamas. 118 male hostages and 20 female. We're talking about 127 Israeli citizens, 11 foreign nationals. There are 2 children among the hostages, the 2 Bibas children, and 10 people over the age of 75. The War Cabinet met yesterday with families of the hostages, those still trapped in Gaza and those since freed. The families told the Cabinet their heartbreaking stories about the thirst, hunger, mental, physical abuse in the Hamas terror dungeons and enduring trauma. After that meeting, the Prime Minister reaffirmed that Israel will spare no effort to return their loved ones. Our goal is to ramp up military pressure on Hamas so that there will be no one left behind. Israel welcomes our great friend President Biden's clear moral leadership, confirming that it was Hamas's refusal to release all the women hostages that broke the deal and terminated the pause in the fighting. We, of course, welcome the President's remarks that everyone still being held hostage by Hamas needs to be returned to their families immediately, and that the United States will not stop working together with us until we get everyone out. As global interest intensifies in the sex crimes of the Hamas rapist regime on October 7th, the information published so far is simply horrific. Eyewitness and forensic accounts of violent rape, gang rape, sexual mutilation, pedophilia, and even necrophilia. I wish to repeat the Prime Minister's statement from last night to the women's rights and human rights organizations that have heard about the Hamas sexual atrocities on October 7th, and I quote, "Where the hell are you?" We expect all civilized leaders, governments, nations to speak up against these atrocities, and it is unforgivable that some still choose to deny, downplay, or deflect the crimes of the Hamas rapist regime that we will topple and bring to justice. An operational update. The IDF has announced the 3rd phase of the ground operations encircling Khan Yunis in order to continue dismantling the Hamas terror state. The Hamas Khan Yunis battalion played a key role in the atrocities of the October 7th massacre, and we are working to destroy the terror infrastructure that it has built above and below ground within civilian areas in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, and we will do that while doing everything we can to minimize civilian casualties consistent with our obligations under international law and to get civilians to safety. Meanwhile, the IDF is securing its accomplishments in northern Gaza, having seized Hamas strongholds there and eliminated its infrastructure. Our forces are operating in the strongholds of Jabalia and Sheja'ir, integrating land and air forces to target Hamas terrorists, many in face-to-face combat, and eliminate their military assets. This campaign has already significantly degraded Hamas's military capabilities on the way to advancing the central goal of this war, which Hamas started, of destroying Hamas's military capabilities altogether. And in just the last few minutes, the IDF has revealed that it has captured one of the largest weapons depots it has found in the Gaza Strip, located near a school and a clinic. We're talking about hundreds of rockets and launchers and UAVs and explosive devices in northern Gaza, again cynically embedded within civilian areas, recklessly putting in danger the lives of the people we have been working hard to evacuate from the war zone. The IDF continues to target Hamas terror infrastructure and operatives with precision. To date, the IDF has eliminated half of Hamas's battalion commanders. We've eliminated the senior leadership of the Hamas Northern Gaza Strip Brigade, including its commander, deputy commander and other leading terrorists, in addition to taking out the commanders of the Beit Lahia, Central Jabalia, Sabra, Shati, Dark Tapah and Shaja'iyah battalions. There will be no refuge for the monsters responsible for the October 7th massacre and planning another one. The IDF continues to engage Hamas forces in intense battles with aerial support as we dismantle the Hamas terror state. As our forces move through Gaza, they continue to expose Hamas's exploitation of civilian infrastructure, including that weapons depot revealed just minutes ago, finding tunnel shafts in the vicinity of civilian infrastructure, including schools, as well as weapon caches inside schools. Yesterday, the Air Force struck approximately 250 terror targets in Gaza, in addition to those ground operations, including the launchers that were used in yesterday's large-scale missile attack on the greater Tel Aviv area. An update from the northern border: the IDF remains on high alert against Hezbollah aggression on our border with Lebanon. Yesterday in the north, IAF combat aircraft attacked a series of Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, including posts and military sites where weapons were stored and Hezbollah terrorists were operating. Israel has already exacted a high price from Hezbollah for its belligerency, a price that it is trying to hide. We remain focused on bringing to justice the monsters of the October 7th massacre and warning anyone of thinking of entering this war. In a word, don't. The State of Israel is completely committed to achieving the goals of this war, securing the release of all the hostages, eliminating Hamas's reign of terror in the Gaza Strip, and permanently removing the threat to Israel's citizens from that territory. We too want this war to end already, but it can only end in a way that ensures that Hamas can never attack our people again, as it has consistently threatened to do since the beginning of the October 7th massacre. To friends around the world who are pressing for a quick end to this war, we say the only way to end the war and to end this war quickly is to apply crushing pressure against the Hamas terror regime and to destroy it in a way that will bring security to Israel and new opportunities for Palestinians who realize that terrorism is a dead end. Friends who want to help us shorten this war must stand steadfast alongside us as we fight to bring the October 7th monsters to justice for the sake of our children and for the sake of humanity. That's the end of our update for today, and we'll now take your questions. Thank you.
A question from Jim Williams, Zenger International News Service, Washington, D.C. How do you respond to those who criticize Israel for not following the rules of war when Hamas, a terrorist organization, hasn't followed any rules thus far, including the ones they agreed to in the pause for the hostage deal?
The Israeli army is acting in accordance with the highest standards of international law under the laws of armed conflict. We are constantly innovating new ways to protect civilians from the decisions of their own leaders to try to keep them in harm's way as human shields, as we're seeing with the Human Shield hotline that we opened for Palestinians to report being held as human shields, as we see with that incredibly detailed map that the IDF has published. We are putting in place efforts that no army in the history of warfare has made in the context of counter-terrorism wars in urban areas to keep civilians safe. And we do this in a reality in which, as you note, the enemy has no regard not only for international humanitarian law, but for basic norms of humanity as well, and continues to perpetrate a double war crime, launching indiscriminate attacks against our civilians while hiding behind their own civilians. But despite Hamas's cynical disregard for international law and human values, we will continue to uphold the highest standards of the laws of armed conflict.
Question from Kieran Monk's The Eye newspaper. Can you tell us anything about reports that the IDF believes it's getting closer to finding Hamas leader Sinwar? And how important would this be to the goal of destroying Hamas?
If the IDF were closing in on Yahya Sinwar, I wouldn't reveal that to him live in this press conference. As we've said, every Hamas terrorist is a dead man walking. Our goal in this war is to bring to justice all of the monsters involved in the October 7th massacre and planning a new one, from the top masterminds all the way to the lowest foot soldiers. And our war will end with the end of Hamas and destruction of its governing and military capabilities inside the Gaza Strip.
Question from Joel Pollack of Breitbart News. Has Israel considered making offers directly to the terrorists or civilians holding individual Israeli hostages to come forward and release them and receive some kind of amnesty or reward?
There will be no immunity and no impunity for the monsters who on October 7th brutally massacred, beheaded, burned, tortured, mutilated and raped our people. We will not leave the Hamas terror regime in place to continue attacking our people and abducting our people. Our strategy at the moment to get the hostages home is based on unrelenting military pressure on Hamas combined with intense diplomatic efforts. That strategy has already been vindicated with the release of 110 hostages, less than half, but a considerable achievement nonetheless to get almost all the children and nearly all the women out, and we're going to continue applying military pressure on Hamas, bringing on board intense diplomatic efforts as well to get Hamas to release all of our hostages, the women and the men, the young and the old, the civilians and the soldiers. There will be no one left behind. None of us are free until all of them are free.
Question from Dan Williams. Your response to US sanctions against settler violence, is this an acceptable measure in Israel's eyes?
Dan, Israel denounces any violence and has zero tolerance for citizens who may be thinking of taking the law into their own hands or engaging in acts of vigilantism or hooliganism. The large majority of Israeli residents in Judea and Samaria are law-abiding citizens who suffer from Palestinian terrorism on a daily basis. That terrorism must come to an end, and the Israeli army is making every effort now to contain this conflict, despite Hamas's best efforts to try to escalate the situation. We're trying to prevent that situation from escalating, and we repeat, we have absolutely zero tolerance for any such hooliganism or vigilantism.
Question from David Isaac at JNS. There was a Channel 12 report yesterday that Sinwar and other senior leaders will look to escape across the Philadelphia corridor. Is that realistic? What level of control does Israel have over that borderline?
The border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt is a border with the sovereign Arab Republic of Egypt. We, of course, have various intelligence means that we cannot get into to describe our attempts to try to get to the monsters responsible for the October 7th massacre. And as we've said, we will continue making every effort to bring them to justice and to get our hands on all of the monsters responsible for the October 7th massacre.
And one last question. Also from Joel Pollack at Breitbart, asking about the notion to flood the Hamas tunnels with seawater. What comment do you have about that?
A question we've received a number of times. I understand it's arousing significant. IDF is dealing with a challenge in the history of counter-terrorism in urban areas, which is the vast underground tunnel network that Hamas has built, using the concrete that was supposed to go to people's houses, diverting it for its military infrastructure. Other Western armies have fought against terror tunnels before. Those have been in mountainous areas away from civilian areas. Hamas has been very innovative in its construction of these underground tunnels, and the Israeli army is also going to have to be innovative and inventive in finding ways to locate and destroy those tunnels. But beyond the means that the Israeli army has already elaborated on, I'm afraid we have no further comment at this stage.
Last question from Dan Williams. Has Israel asked Egypt to take in Gaza refugees?
Dan, let me circle back to you on that. At the moment, we're focusing on getting civilians out of harm's way inside the Gaza Strip. That's why, with the beginning of the ground operation, we designated the Al-Mawasi area in southwest Gaza as an area that would be suitable for international agencies to set up shelter and deliver food and water and medication for the civilians who need it. And our focus is to urge humanitarian organizations, those on the ground, instead of shoveling civilians into densely populated areas where Hamas has already embedded itself inside and under civilian areas. We want to see them going to humanitarian zones inside the Gaza Strip where Hamas is not operating, so that we can target the Hamas terror infrastructure responsible for the October 7th massacre.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day and keep safe. Thank you.